The last human ship left the Galactic Council station at 0300 hours station time. No announcement, no farewell speech, no dramatic music or waving crowds. Just a slow, quiet undocking. The magnetic clamps releasing one by one with soft mechanical clicks, and then the vessel slid into the dark like a shadow disappearing into deeper shadow. By the time the night cycle maintenance drones noticed the empty berths, the humans were already gone. Ambassador Vasekara of the Thalindri was the first senior official to receive the report. She read it twice, then set it down on her desk and stared at the wall for a long moment. The humans had submitted their formal withdrawal from the Galactic Council 48 hours prior. The document had been polite, precise, and completely without emotion. It cited irreconcilable differences in policy priorities, a sustained pattern of votes that undermined human interests, and a philosophical divergence regarding the definition of sentient rights. It thanked the Council for the years of cooperation. It wished all member species continued prosperity. It did not ask for a response. Most of the Council had not taken it seriously. The Vethari representative had laughed, a sound like grinding gravel, and declared it a negotiating tactic. The Sethmaran delegation had filed the document under diplomatic posturing and moved on to debates about asteroid mining rights in the outer reaches. Even the Secretary-General, the ancient and supposedly wise prelate San of the Jahari, had waved one of his four hands dismissively and said, "Humans always threaten. They never follow through. Give them a cycle or two and they will return with a list of demands. That is their way." That had been 48 hours ago. Now the berths were empty, and the humans were gone. Vasekara walked through the human wing of the station that same morning. She had been there many times before, for meetings, for the occasional shared meal, for the informal conversations that often accomplished more than any formal session. She had always found the space slightly unsettling in a way she could not name. It was too warm by Thalindri standards, the lighting tuned to a yellow frequency that felt almost aggressive, the furniture built for beings who sat rather than perched. There had always been noise, voices, the hum of their strange devices, the smell of their food, which was somehow both unpleasant and fascinating. Now it was silent. They had taken everything. Not just their personal belongings, but the systems, the panels, the embedded infrastructure they had quietly installed over the decades. Cables had been neatly removed from wall channels. Interface ports were capped with smooth cover plates. Even the small potted plants, humans had an unusual habit of growing living things in their workspaces, were gone, leaving only dark soil circles on window ledges where the containers had sat. It was the completeness of it that disturbed her most. This was not a rage quit, not a dramatic storming off. This had been planned, methodically, carefully, over a long time. They had known they were leaving long before they filed the paperwork. The paperwork, she now understood, had been a courtesy, a formality, perhaps even a small kindness, giving the Council 48 hours to react, even if they chose not to. They had chosen not to. The emergency session was called for mid-morning. The Council chamber, which could seat representatives from all 47 member species, was full. Everyone had come, which was itself unusual. The Vethari sat in their heavy gravity harnesses looking, for the first time in Vasekara's experience, uncertain. The Sethmaran floated in their sealed moisture tanks, their bioluminescent skin cycling through colors she associated with agitation. Even the Droon, who communicated through chemical signals and rarely seemed to notice anything that did not directly threaten their hive, had sent 3 representatives instead of the usual one. The Secretary-General opened the session by reading the human withdrawal document aloud. In the echoing chamber, it sounded different than it had on paper. Colder, more final. Then came the part that no one had wanted to address in the 48 hours since it was filed. The humans, upon their withdrawal, had also revoked all technology sharing agreements. Under Council law, this was their right. Shared technologies remained the property of the species that had originated them, licensed to other members under the terms of cooperation treaties. Withdrawal voided those licenses. The document listed, in an appendix that ran to 63 pages, every technology the humans were reclaiming rights to. Someone had to read the appendix aloud. The junior aide assigned to this task did so in a voice that grew quieter and more strained with every page. Faster than light communication arrays, human design, built on human mathematics, used by 31 of the 47 member species. Reclaimed. The atmospheric processing systems installed on 6 colony worlds, keeping the air breathable for species that could not otherwise survive there. Reclaimed. The medical diagnostic protocols used in every major station hospital, capable of treating over 200 alien physiologies, developed by human xenobiologists over 80 years of work. Reclaimed. The navigational software running in the autopilot systems of most commercial and military vessels. Reclaimed. The deep scan array currently providing the Council's only long-range early warning capability against unidentified objects in the outer sectors. Reclaimed. By the time the aid reached page 30, the chamber had gone very quiet. By page 50, several representatives were requesting private communication lines to their home governments. By page 63, the Secretary General's 4 hands were folded tightly together on the desk in front of him, and he was staring at nothing. Vasekara had done the math in her head as the list was read. The Thalindri were better off than most. They had maintained parallel development programs in several areas, partly out of a cultural pride that prevented them from depending entirely on another species' work. They would lose the communication arrays and feel it, but they would not be crippled. Others would not be so fortunate. The Pethsur had no independent FTL communication capability. None. They had adopted the human system 3 generations ago and stopped funding their own research entirely. For them, communication between their home world and their colonies would drop from near instantaneous to a matter of months, the old way, by courier ship. The Draxi colony on Mir 7 breathed a carefully maintained atmospheric mix that their biology required. The processing system keeping that air stable was human-built. Without the software licenses, it could not be updated or repaired by anyone who currently understood it. The Draxi had approximately 18 months of stable operation before degradation began. After that, the math was unpleasant. It was the Vethari representative who finally broke the silence. His name was Kethdar, and he was known for saying difficult things loudly and without apology. "We need to contact them," he said. "Immediately. We need to offer them whatever they want." "We do not know where they have gone," said the Secretary General quietly. That landed in the chamber like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples were visible, a shifting of bodies, a cycling of bioluminescent signals, the sharp click of Droon mandibles. They filed no flight plan. The Secretary General continued. "The station logs show their vessels departing on a bearing toward the outer sectors, but they dropped from our tracking systems within 6 hours. The tracking systems, I am told, run on human navigation software," Vasekara said. "Yes." Another silence. Longer this time. Kethdar leaned forward in his harness. "They could not have anticipated, they could not have planned to simply disappear. They have colonies. They have trade relationships. They have had 80 years, Vasekara said slowly, thinking as she spoke. 80 years inside this council, watching how it works, watching what it values, watching what it ignores." She paused. "They did not leave in anger. That is the thing none of us have said yet. They left in order, with a plan, which means they have somewhere to go." The chamber was very quiet. "The question," she said, "is not where they went. The question is what they built while we were not paying attention. Outside the great observation windows, the space where the human ships had been docked was empty and dark and gave no answers. The first system failure happened 9 days after the humans left. It was not one of the catastrophic ones, not the atmospheric processors on Mir 7, not the navigational arrays on the warships, not the hospital diagnostic networks that everyone was quietly terrified about. It was something smaller, a freight routing system on Tanek Station, out near the edge of the Kethmaran shipping lanes. The automated cargo management software simply stopped accepting updates. No crash, no alarm, no dramatic error message. It just froze in place, running its last known configuration, refusing to learn anything new. The station operators tried everything they knew. They called in their best technical teams. They dug into the code, and that was when they found the first layer of what the humans had actually built. The freight system was not broken. It was locked. Deep inside the architecture, beneath 17 layers of what the Kethmaran engineers had assumed were just standard processing routines, was a licensing verification module. Every 90 days, the system had been quietly reaching out to a human-maintained authentication server, confirming its operational status, and receiving a silent all clear that allowed it to continue. No one had known this was happening. There had been no reason to look. The authentication server was now offline. The system was not broken. It was simply waiting for a permission that would never come. When the technical report reached the council, the Kethmaran representative submitted it with a note attached that read, in its entirety, "We do not know how many of our systems contain this architecture. We are beginning a full audit. We expect it will take months. We are not optimistic about what we will find." The audit teams across the galaxy started finding things. It became a grim kind of archaeology. Engineers peeling back layers of technology they had been using for decades, systems so deeply embedded in daily life that no one had thought to question them, and discovering underneath it all the quiet signature of human design. Not hidden maliciously, everything was documented, if you knew where to look and had the correct access credentials. The humans had been perfectly transparent, in the way that a library is transparent. All the information is there, if you know what to ask for and have a membership card. The membership cards had expired on the day the ships left the dock. Ambassador Vasekara spent those 9 days working through the problem the way she worked through all problems, methodically, without panic, starting from what was actually known rather than what was feared. She assembled a small team, her 2 senior aides, a Thalindri systems analyst named Parath, and a Jahari diplomat named Karelsa, who had spent 30 years working directly with human delegations. Karelsa was the most valuable person in the room because she understood something the others were still struggling to accept. "They are not sabotaging us," Karelsa said. On the 3rd day, when one of the younger aides began using the word trap to describe the licensing architecture they kept discovering. A trap implies they wanted us to suffer. They did not design these systems to hurt us. They designed them for themselves because they were very good at designing things, and then they shared them because the council asked them to share, and they agreed. The licenses are standard practice. We all agreed to those terms. We did not know the terms included authentication servers that could simply stop, the aide said. Did we ask? Silence. We adopted their systems because they worked better than ours, Karelsa continued. We stopped funding our own research because it seemed redundant. We did not read the documentation because we trusted that things would keep working and could not imagine a reason they would not. None of that is something the humans did to us. She paused. It is something we did to ourselves. This was uncomfortable and true, and everyone in the room knew it, which made it more uncomfortable. Vasekara kept returning to one question. If the humans had planned this, and the evidence was increasingly clear that they had planned it, over years, possibly over decades, what had they been building while they planned? You did not leave a structure this large, this intertwined, this dependent on your continued cooperation, unless you had somewhere else to go. You did not walk away from the galaxy's most powerful political body unless you had something you considered more valuable waiting for you on the other side. She sent a quiet inquiry to the Thalindri Deep Space Monitoring Network, asking them to look for unusual construction activity in the sectors beyond Council space. The data came back within 2 days, and it was interesting. In 3 separate systems along the outer boundary of charted space, there were energy signatures consistent with large-scale construction. Not weapon testing, not resource extraction, construction. The kind of sustained, organized energy output that accompanied the building of something big over a long period. The Thalindri analysts estimated the oldest signatures had begun appearing roughly 40 years ago. The most recent had stopped approximately 6 months before the humans filed their withdrawal paperwork. They had been building for 40 years. Whatever it was finished. Back in the council chamber, the political situation was deteriorating at a rate that Vasekara found genuinely alarming. The Vethari, facing the loss of their FTL communication network, had begun making aggressive noises about dispatching warships to locate the humans and encourage re-engagement. Kethdar, never subtle, had proposed this openly in session and received more support than Vasekara had expected. The species most affected by the technology withdrawal were frightened, and frightened species with warships made poor decisions. She requested a private session with Secretary General San. He looked older than he had 9 days ago. The Jahari aged slowly under normal circumstances, but stress did its own work, and the past 9 days had not been kind. He sat across from her in his private office, for hands folded, and waited for her to say what she had come to say. "If we send warships," she said, "we will not find them. Their navigation software runs our tracking systems. They will see us coming from light years away and simply not be where we are looking. I know. And if we did find them, what would we do? Threaten a species that just demonstrated it can turn off our hospitals and let our colonies asphyxiate by simply ceasing to answer a server ping. Sam was quiet for a moment. You think we should negotiate? I think we should understand what happened before we decide anything. She slid a data pad across the desk. There are construction signatures in 3 outer systems. 40 years of building. The project is complete. I want to know what they built. Sam looked at the data for a long moment. And how do you propose we find out? We cannot track them. We have no contact. We have Corelsa, Vasekra said. She worked with the human delegation for 30 years. She knew their senior diplomats personally. And she tells me that the humans, whatever else they may be, are not cruel. She paused. They left. They did not attack. They did not sabotage. They did not make demands. They simply departed and left us to face the consequences of choices we made ourselves. That is not the behavior of an enemy. Then what is it? Vasekra thought about the empty berths, the capped cable ports, the dark circles on the windowsills where the plants had been. I think it is the behavior of a people who finally decided to stop waiting for us to take them seriously, she said. And I think, if we want to survive the next 12 months without our colonies going dark, we need to find a way to show them that we have learned something. Sam looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded, slowly. Find a way to reach them, he said. Whatever it takes. Vasekra stood, picked up her data pad, and walked toward the door. She paused before she left. One more thing, she said. When we reach them, and I believe we will, do not let anyone on this council use the word demand. Not in any language, not in any translation. We are not in a position to demand anything. I need everyone to understand that before we begin. She left without waiting for his answer. In the corridor outside, her comm unit was already active, and Corelsa was waiting on the other end. Somewhere beyond the edge of charted space, something large was waiting too. That Corelsa had kept one thing she was not supposed to keep. It was a personal communicator, a small device, human-made, that the delegation's senior diplomat, a woman named Director Hannah Vasquez, had pressed into Corelsa's hand during what turned out to be their last private conversation. That had been 11 months ago, before the withdrawal papers were filed, before anyone had any idea what was coming. Vasquez had said only 3 things. She had said that Corelsa was the best non-human diplomat she had ever worked with. She had said that she hoped, sincerely, that what was coming would not damage their personal friendship. And she had said that if things became difficult, if the council found itself in a position where it genuinely needed to talk, not negotiate, not posture, but actually talk, Corelsa should use the device. Corelsa had not told anyone about the device. Not immediately. She was a careful person, and careful people do not reveal everything they hold until they understand the shape of the moment they are in. For 9 days she had watched the council flounder, watched the audits turn up licensing architecture no one had known existed, watched the Vethary representative slide toward aggression and the Secretary General age visibly from stress. She had watched and waited and tried to understand the shape of the moment. When Vasekra called her and said it was time to try to reach the humans, Corelsa understood that the shape of the moment had finally arrived. She sent the signal from her private quarters, late at night, with the lights low. It was a simple transmission. The device had only one function, and that was to send a single coded ping to a receiver somewhere outside charted space. She did not know what the ping said in its encrypted form. She suspected it said something like, "Someone here is ready to listen." The response came in 14 hours. Not a message, a set of coordinates, and a time. She brought this to Vasekra, who brought it to Secretary General San, who called an immediate closed session of the Council's senior ambassadors. Not the full chamber, just the 7 species whose situations were most critical. The Pethsur, whose communications were already slowing. The Draxi, watching their atmospheric processors with increasing anxiety. The Kethmaran, whose freight networks were seizing up one station at a time. The Vethary, who had military concerns they would not fully articulate, but which everyone understood. And the Thalindri, Jahari, and one other. The Marin, who had said almost nothing publicly since the withdrawal, but who had the largest fleet of independent deep space vessels, and therefore the best ability to reach a set of coordinates beyond charted space. The coordinates were in a system with no designation in the Council's star charts. Far out, past the last survey markers, in a region of space the Council had classified as low priority for exploration 40 years ago and never revisited. It was, Vasekara noted, precisely where one of the construction energy signatures had been detected. There was a debate about who should go. The Vethari wanted to send a warship and frame it as an escort. Vasekara said no, flatly, in a way that brooked no argument, and was backed by Kurelsa and San. They would send one diplomatic vessel. It would go unarmed. It would carry Kurelsa as the primary contact, Vasekara as the Council's official representative, and 3 others chosen for their specific expertise. A Draxi engineer who understood atmospheric systems, a Pethsur communications specialist, and Perith, the Thalindri analyst who had been quietly doing the best technical assessment work since the crisis began. They departed 3 days after receiving the coordinates. The journey took 9 days, pushing the diplomatic vessel to its rated maximum. For the first 3 days, travel was normal, charted space, familiar stars, the background hum of functional systems. On the 4th day, they crossed the last survey marker and entered the uncharted region. On the 6th day, Perith came to Vasekara's cabin with his analysis pad and a look on his face she had not seen before. "I have been trying to characterize the energy signatures ahead of us," he said. "The ones consistent with construction from the monitoring network data." And he set the pad down. "They are not consistent with construction that is finished. They are consistent with construction that is operational." He paused. "Whatever they built out here, it is running. It has been running, I think, for some time. The signature has changed character from the earlier data. It is steadier now, more complex." "How large?" Vasekara asked. Perith looked at the pad, then back at her. "Large," he said. "Very large." On the 9th day, they arrived. No one in the Council had known what to expect. Vasekara had imagined a station, perhaps, a large one, a human outpost, a place to negotiate from. Perith had suggested maybe a shipyard. The Draxi engineer had guessed a research installation. They were all wrong in the way that people are wrong when they lack the imagination to think big enough. What they found was a world, not a planet. The system's single rocky planet was visible off to one side, unmistakable in its natural state, cratered and cold, and obviously not what they were looking at. What they were looking at was a structure in orbit, and structure was an inadequate word for something that took 40 minutes to fly around at approach speed. It was vast in the way that natural things are vast, the way a mountain range is vast or an ocean. Not like a built thing at all, except that it was clearly, unmistakably built. Layers of interconnected habitats and facilities, and growing spaces and manufacturing bays and things that had no obvious function. All of it arranged in a configuration that made a kind of sense the longer you looked at it, like a language you could almost read. And it was alive. Lights moved on its surface. Ships, human ships, dozens of them, moved around and between and through it like cells in a living body. There were gardens visible through observation ports. There were children. Through the long-range optical sensors, Perith picked up a school visible through a transparent wall, small figures working at tables under warm yellow light. The Pethsur communications specialist was first to speak, and he said only, "How long have they been working on this?" 40 years for the oldest sections, Perith said quietly. "More, maybe, for the planning." Kurelsa said nothing. She was looking at a communication panel where a response light had just appeared. An invitation, transmitted in standard Council frequency, polite and precise in exactly the way she remembered from 11 months of working with Vasquez. The message said, "Please dock at Bay 7. Director Vasquez will meet your delegation personally. You are welcome here." The word, welcome, was doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and every person in the vessel felt the weight of it. They were being received as guests, not as supplicants, not as threats, not as adversaries who had come to demand things. Guests. The distinction mattered enormously. Bay 7 was clean and well-lit and warm. That particular human warmth that Vasekara had always found slightly overwhelming. There was a welcome delegation waiting. 6 humans, dressed simply, standing relaxed in a way that communicated ease without arrogance. At their front was a woman in her 60s, gray-haired and direct-eyed, who walked forward as the diplomatic team descended and extended a hand to Kurelsa first. "I hoped it would be you," Vasquez said. I kept the device, Carelsa replied. I know. Vasquez smiled. That is why I gave it to you. The handshake was brief. Then Vasquez turned to Vasekara, and her expression shifted, still open, still controlled, but with something more careful behind it. She extended her hand again. Ambassador, she said, we have a great deal to talk about. Vasekara took the hand and felt, for the first time in 20 days, that this situation might have a shape she could work with. We do, she said, and I want to begin by saying, on behalf of the Council, that we are here to listen, not to negotiate from positions, not to make demands. She paused, remembering her own instruction to San. Just to listen. Vasquez studied her for a moment. Something in her expression shifted slightly, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it, as if she had prepared for a harder opening and found herself recalibrating. That is a better start than I expected, she said honestly. We have had 20 very educational days, Vasekara replied. Vasquez almost smiled at that. She gestured toward a corridor that led deeper into the structure, toward the sound of movement and voices, and, somewhere, the smell of food being prepared. Then let us begin, she said. There is much to show you. They walked together into the station that humanity had been quietly building for 40 years, while the Council had been busy with other things, and the corridor lights were warm and golden around them, and somewhere ahead, something new was waiting to be understood. Director Vasquez gave them the tour first. Before any conversation about licenses or systems or the slow-motion crises unfolding across the galaxy, she walked them through the station for 3 hours, unhurried, the way a person shows a guest something they are proud of. Not boasting. There was no performance in it. No look what we built triumphalism. It was quieter than that. More like watching someone open a door to a room they had been working in alone for a long time, finally ready for someone else to see it. The station had a name. They called it the Threshold. It had started, Vasquez explained as they walked, as a contingency plan. 30 years ago, a group of human scientists, diplomats, and engineers had looked at the trajectory of the Council's political culture and concluded that the long-term trend was not in humanity's favor. Not because anyone hated humans. She was careful to say this, and Vasekara noted the care, but because the Council was structured around inertia. Larger, older species had established patterns of power and priority that were deeply embedded in every process and procedure. Humanity had joined late, contributed enormously, and been consistently placed third or fourth in line for everything that mattered. After a generation of that, the scientists and diplomats had begun asking a question. What if we stopped trying to be a member and started trying to be something else entirely? The Threshold was the answer to that question. Not a hiding place, not a fortress, not a declaration of war against the Council. A demonstration, a proof of concept, a place where humans could show, concretely and without argument, what they could do when they stopped spending their energy fighting institutional resistance and simply built. The medical wing was first. It was larger than anything in any Council station, not because humans were wasteful, but because they had designed it to treat, eventually, every known sapient species. The diagnostic systems were more advanced than what the Council's hospitals ran, refined through decades of parallel development that had continued quietly even while the publicly shared versions were being adopted across the galaxy. There were wards configured for Draxi atmospheric requirements, for thylindry pressure tolerances, for the moisture-dependent biology of the Sethmaron. Vasekara watched the Draxi engineer walk through the atmospheric management section with the particular focused silence of someone doing mathematics in their head and coming up with numbers they had not expected. The research district came next. Human scientists worked in open spaces that connected freely across disciplines, a materials physicist working 2 desks from a xenobiologist, a structural engineer sharing a whiteboard with someone whose specialty Perith could not immediately identify. He asked, and the answer was, temporal mechanics applied to long-duration habitat sustainability. Not a field the Council's research institutions had anyone working in. The humans had an entire department. The agricultural levels were the strangest and most remarkable. 40 levels of growing space, lit by tuned spectrum systems that Perith immediately recognized as a derivative of the atmospheric processing science and immediately began asking questions about. Food growing in configurations that no planet-bound farmer would recognize. Vertical, layered, precisely controlled, cycling nutrients through closed systems with almost zero waste. Enough to feed the station's current population of 60,000 humans and, as expansion continued, considerably more. 60,000, Carelsa said quietly when Vasquez mentioned this number. For now, Vasquez replied. The framework supports considerably more. We have been conservative in our growth rate. We wanted the infrastructure to be stable before we scaled. How many more? Vasquez paused at a window that looked out into the structured darkness of a garden level, where plants grew in long rows under artificial sky. Several million, in the final configuration. The silence after that was the kind that needs a moment to be absorbed properly. Several million humans, living in space they had built themselves, outside the jurisdiction of the Galactic Council, in a structure designed from its foundations up to be self-sufficient for centuries. It was not a colony ship, not a station in any sense the Council usually used the word. It was something new, something that did not have a name yet in any of their languages, because no one had built one before. The conversation, when they finally sat down for it, happened in a conference room near the center of the threshold, at a table that was very deliberately round. Vasquez had thought about this, Vasquez suspected. The round table said, no head, no hierarchy, no position of dominance. Everyone seated here is a party to a conversation, not a supplicant or a power. Vasquez spoke first, as she had committed to doing, and she spoke plainly. She told Vasquez what the past 20 days had been. She described the freight system failure, the audit teams, the 63 pages of reclaimed licenses, the growing fear in the Council about the Draxi atmospheric processors, and the Pethsur communication drought. She described the Vethari representative reaching for military options and being stopped. She described the Secretary General looking older by the day. She did not spin any of it, did not frame it as accusation, did not soften it into something more comfortable. She told it as it was, because she had decided in the corridor outside San's office that the only thing she could offer that might actually matter was honesty. Vasquez listened to all of it without interrupting. When Vasquez finished, Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We did not design the withdrawal to hurt anyone. I want you to believe that." "I believe it," Vasquez said. "That is almost a more difficult thing to sit with." Vasquez looked at her steadily. "You understand why we left." It was not really a question, but Vasquez answered it as though it were. "You left because you had tried everything else. You voted, you advocated, you compromised, you waited. And after 80 years the Council had still not meaningfully changed in any way that reflected what you had contributed to it." She paused. "You were not angry. You were just finished." Something shifted in Vasquez's face. Not quite emotion, but the edge of something. "Yes," she said quietly. "That is accurate." The Draxi engineer, who had been sitting in tight-lipped silence since the agricultural tour, spoke up. "The atmospheric system on Mir 7. 18 months, our technicians estimate, before degradation." Vasquez nodded. "We know. Can you help us?" "Yes," Vasquez said, without hesitation. "We can help you." That was never in question. She looked around the table carefully. "We did not withdraw those licenses to watch anyone die. We withdrew them because the license structure was the most legible way to demonstrate the scale of the interdependency that had developed, the degree to which the Council had been treating our contributions as background infrastructure without ever addressing the political reality of what that meant." She paused. "We needed you to see what you had been standing on. We did not need anyone to fall through it." The Pethsur communications specialist leaned forward. "Then you will restore the agreements?" "Not restore," Vasquez said. "That is the wrong word. We will not go back to the previous arrangement, because the previous arrangement was the problem. We will build something new." She set a single document on the table and slid it to the center. It was not long. 12 pages, compared to the 63-page appendix that had accompanied the withdrawal notice. It was a framework, not a set of demands, not a treaty in the traditional sense. A framework for a different kind of relationship, one in which the humans were not members of the Council but partners to it, in which technology sharing was governed by genuine bilateral agreements with real consideration on both sides, not absorbed into the background as something that simply existed and required no ongoing acknowledgement, in which human interests were represented not through the slow grind of Council voting, but through a direct bilateral consultation process with meaningful authority, in which, fundamentally, The council acknowledged that what humanity had built, in the threshold, in the technology it had shared, in the 80 years of contribution it had made, was worth something that went beyond a seat at a table where the important decisions were already made by the time anyone sat down. Perith, who had been taking quiet notes throughout, looked up from the document. "This is remarkable," he said. It was not flattery. It was a technical observation. Vasekara read it carefully, twice. She looked up at Vasquez. "The council will resist parts of this." "I know," Vasquez said. "There are parts of it they will resist loudly. Particularly the consultation provisions and the autonomous jurisdiction clauses." She met Vasekara's eyes. "But you can remind them, when they resist, that the alternative is continuing to have conversations about atmospheric processors from the wrong side of a deadline." It was not a threat. It was arithmetic. Vasekara appreciated the distinction. "I will take this back," Vasekara said. "I cannot promise the council will accept it as written. There will be questions, revisions, sessions that I would rather not have to sit through." "I know," Vasquez said again. She did not seem troubled by it. "But I will advocate for it," Vasekara said. "Sincerely. Because I think it is right, and because I think the council has earned this particular difficulty through 40 years of choices it made when no one was watching." She paused. "No one was watching you, either." "No," Vasquez agreed. They were not. The tour had shown her that. The threshold had not been built in secret. Exactly. Anyone paying close attention to the energy signatures in the outer sectors could have found it decades ago. But no one had been paying attention. The council had been too busy with asteroid mining rights and voting procedures, and the comfortable assumption that things would continue as they were because they always had. Humanity had used that inattention to build a future. On the journey back, Vasekara sat alone in the observation lounge for a long time and looked at the stars. The threshold had slipped behind them, visible for a while as a shape against the darkness, and then gone. But it was still there, she knew, and would be there regardless of what the council decided. That was the thing she needed everyone to understand when she landed. The humans had not built the threshold to threaten anyone. They had built it because they were humans, and humans built things, and the things they built had a habit of being rather extraordinary. The council could choose to engage with that on new terms. It could choose to acknowledge what had been standing in its foundation all along and decide to treat it accordingly. Or it could spend the next 10 years watching the threshold grow, from the outside, wondering what it had lost. She looked at the 12-page document in her hands. She intended to make sure it chose correctly. The stars outside the window were old and cold and utterly indifferent to what small beings did in the space between them. But the small beings kept doing it anyway, kept building, kept talking, kept trying to find arrangements that worked. That was the one thing, she thought, that every species in the galaxy seemed to share, no matter how different in every other way. The humans had just always been slightly better at it than everyone else was willing to admit. She set the document down, folded her hands, and began composing in her mind the speech she would give when she walked back into the council chamber and laid the framework on the Secretary General's desk. It would need to be very good. She suspected it would be.